Welcome back to Hardball. Newly released transcripts of closed-door testimony show Karl Rove played a key role in the ouster of U.S. Attorney David Iglesias, one of the 9 federal prosecutors fired in 2006. Here's Iglesias testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee about a phone call from then Republican Senator Pete Domenici. Let's listen.
He wanted to ask me about the corruption matters or the corruption cases that have been widely reported in the local media. I said, all right. And he said, are these going to be filed before November? And I said, I didn't think so. And to which he replied, I'm very sorry to hear that. And then the line went dead.
Is it fair to say that you felt pressured to hurry subsequent cases and prosecutions as a result of the call?
Yes, sir, I did. I felt leaned on. I felt pressured to get these matters moving.
And as you say, it was unusual for you to receive a call from a senator at home while you were the U.S. attorney.
Unprecedented. It had never happened.
Senator Domenici's staff then made clear to Karl Rove they wanted Iglesias gone. So what does this newly released information say about Rove's involvement? Joining me are Newsweek's Mike Isikoff and the Washington Post's Carrie Johnson. Carrie Johnson, what have we learned?
We've learned that Karl Rove was more involved and interested in the roles of some of these U.S. attorneys than had previously been described. In an interview with me last month, Rove described his role as one of almost a bystander or a conduit of complaints he received from lawmakers on Capitol Hill and state GOP party leaders around the country. But some of these emails, and in fact the testimony of Harriet Miers, reflects that Rove took a personal interest in at least some of these cases, most particularly David Iglesias's in New Mexico. Harriet Miers testified to the House Judiciary Committee that Rove called her in a very agitated manner in the fall of 2006 to report that David Iglesias had become a big problem and that he, Rove, wanted something done about it.
Yeah, according to the testimony, it says Harriet Miers said of Rove, my best recollection is that he was very agitated about the U.S. attorney in New Mexico. It was clear to me that he felt like he had a serious problem and that he wanted something done about it. Michael Isikoff, in The Sopranos, when Tony wants something done about it, we understand it. He doesn't have to be more specific than that.
Right.
How do you read this?
Exactly the way anybody would read it, that Rove was playing a direct role, had taken upon himself to try to get rid of David Iglesias as the U.S. attorney. And what's important to realize here, Rove put out a statement last night, which is almost as stunning as the testimony in which he says the new material shows politics played no role in the Bush administration's removal of U.S. attorneys, and I played no role in deciding which U.S. attorneys were retained and which replaced. In the case of Iglesias, let's just put this in context. Rove, when he makes that call, has just made a political trip to New Mexico where he is consulting and talking to...
Michael, can I just stop you right? I want you to go through these steps, but I just want to take the audience along with us. The important thing about what you just described, about Rove's press release, is the stunning Orwellian nature of it. The released material says exactly the opposite. And this press release simply relies on the notion that no one is going to look at the material that was actually released, which shows that Rove was all over this. It was political. He was pushing it, and it was all about him pushing it. Go ahead, Michael, with the sequence.
If I could just put it in context, that phone call that Carrie just described, Rove to Harriet Miers, very agitated. Rove is in New Mexico on a political trip talking to New Mexico Republican Party officials who are complaining about Iglesias' failure to bring cases with political implications that would help the Republican Party in New Mexico and hurt the Democrats, voter fraud and corruption cases. So when Rove is complaining about Iglesias, he's not complaining because Iglesias isn't doing a good enough job on Medicare fraud, or he hasn't talked to people in the office to get an idea of what morale is, to get an idea of how good a manager is. It's purely political complaints that he's passing along, which Miers then relays to the Justice Department, and this comes just before, within a month of when Iglesias is put on the list to be fired. No other reason or explanation contemporaneous has been put forward as to why Iglesias was put on that list. There were ex post facto reasons that came in later that never held up about performance jobs, but all the contemporaneous records show the only complaints were political complaints coming from Rove's office and Rove himself.
And Kerry Johnson, the record shows that there's absolutely, that Rove doesn't take a minute to consider or look into in any way, nor is he capable of looking into in any way, what the quality of the evidence might be about this voter fraud. Only the U.S. attorney knows what he has collected. He cannot show that evidence to Rove, and so Rove wants this guy fired on the assumption that there is some voter fraud thing that he should be prosecuting, even though Rove doesn't have any idea what the evidence is.
Well,
right?
and Rove, in an interview with me last month, acknowledged that he was not in a position to evaluate the strength or weakness of a law enforcement case. He did say, however, in testimony to the House and in further interviews, that what he had heard from these GOP party leaders in New Mexico about Iglesias and what he had heard in more than a dozen phone calls from Senator Pete Domenici and his chief of staff at the time, Steve Bell, right during this period, starting in the fall of '06, leading up to when Iglesias got on the firing list, was nonstop complaining, insistence from Domenici, who went all the way up to Josh Bolton, the White House chief of staff, to bring his complaints about Iglesias almost to the president's doorstep.
And Kerry, just to clarify, not one of those people, Republican Party operatives in the state or Senator Domenici or anyone in the White House, had any idea what evidence there was in the U.S. Attorney's file. None of them had any idea whether there was something there that should be prosecuted and wasn't being prosecuted.
No, in fact, Lawrence, there were some leaks around this period of time from perhaps people involved in the investigations that Iglesias was sitting on the case, or a case or more than one case, because he didn't want to spring an indictment too close to an election, too close to the 2006 midterm elections. He did go on to indict and convict several of these people, as did his successor as U.S. Attorney. So I think we can surmise that some of this evidence was in fact strong. There are Justice Department rules about how close you can bring a political corruption case in advance of an election. And Iglesias' testimony is that he didn't want to cross that line.
Did you expect that these emails were going to surface and that they would contain this kind of information?
Well, you know, when they dragged their feet for 2.5 years in producing documents that we had subpoenaed and requested, you know, there had to have been a reason why they didn't want to turn that information over. And the reason they didn't is because it's very clearly damaging testimony that contradicts all of their statements that they had nothing to do with the firing of the U.S. attorneys until, you know, late in the process. The emails show very clearly that there was involvement very early on, and that most of the decision-making was driven by political considerations.
So the fact is, the way it's playing out, if we can view it this way, after Bush won re-election, there was basically an attack on the judiciary, and they were going to go after U.S. attorneys who were not prosecuting Democrats strong enough across the country. And there's also some comments about within the White House. For instance, Harriet Miers says that she remembers that Karl Rove was so upset about one U.S. attorney in particular. Do you feel that there were any laws broken here at this point? Could you point to anything that you really believe something, the laws were broken here?
Well, I think certainly that there was information contained in the emails which suggests that the U.S. attorneys were fired for improper reasons, and there may have been testimony in front of Congress that was false or misleading. So obstruction of justice or possible perjury charges are still available. There is a federal prosecutor right now, Nora Dennehy, who is investigating. We've turned over all of those documents to her. She will be reviewing it to see if there are any criminal charges to be brought.
And there is some reaction from one of your colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Lamar Smith has made this comment: Democrats need to stop wasting taxpayers' time and money on political investigations that are nothing more than the politics of personal destruction. Can you respond to that?
Well, I find it quite amusing that they don't want investigations when it's their folks that are being under investigation for criminal, potentially criminal activity, but yet, you know, when the shoe is on the other foot, they're alleging all kinds of things against Democrats. It's very clear to me they want this embarrassment behind them. They want to sweep it under the rug. They don't want to deal with the fact that there's a very serious problem, and that is that the Department of Justice, which is supposed to dispense justice without fear or favoritism, was being used, strong-armed by political operatives like Karl Rove to do potentially illegal things, and corrupting our system of justice is a very, very critical and important thing that we need to look at to make sure that it never happens again.
And finally, Congresswoman Sanchez, if you had to say something tonight to Attorney General Eric Holder about this, what would it be?
If I could just make a plea to the Attorney General, it would be to not allow this to go uninvestigated, and to please make sure that the Department of Justice is never used for grubby political agendas like it was under the Bush administration.
So you want the DOJ, the DOJ, you want them to investigate this. You want them to get involved and go beyond the House investigation to this point.
Absolutely, and I want them to hold people accountable for their hidden, nasty, dirty little political agendas.
Okay.